Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon and welcome to this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. Yesterday, President Donald Trump issued an executive order that cuts back federal funding for medical institutions that provide puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and surgical mutilations to minors. We talk more about this with our friend Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, and frankly, this is a long time coming. And all of you listening know exactly where I stand on the matter, but it's not a matter of personal opinion here. It really is a question of what is objectively good for human persons and what will bring about true human flourishing. And medical intervention for what are ostensibly issues that can be treated by other means, especially therapy, puberty blockers, hormone therapy, surgical mutilation. Some of those, in fact, most of those, are frankly irreversible. And therefore, there's a moral onus at play here. There's a culpability towards those people who have forced these things on children. Because until a certain age, making irreversible changes to your body is something that no child should be put through, let alone allowed to do. And so Andrea Picciotti-Bayer and I discussed the legal ramifications of this executive order and what we're going to see this look like and pan out at the level of the states especially. We then talked with Dr. Travis Curtright. He's a professor at Ave Maria University. I'm really glad to be able to speak with him again. Thomas More, best known for his martyrdom, but he also sets another example of holiness, vocational discernment. As a young man, he dreamed of becoming a scholar and pursuing a religious vocation. His disinterest in the professional life was strained his relationship with his father. And we discuss his discernment and his views on reconciling with the world with Dr. Travis Curtright. Because in a very particular way, Thomas More was a bit of a failure to his father in that regard. And yet, because he answered what God was calling him to do, he remains to this day one of the greatest exemplars of stalwartness to the Christian faith, and a true witness and a hero for many of us. And then finally, we're going to talk about something that I would otherwise deem ridiculous, but I think it's important to talk about. Deepfake Magisterium, artificial intelligence, making videos. The Vatican has issued several statements this last year because there are videos about Pope Francis and some other cardinals making statements that were actually just made by artificial intelligence. So we talk about all of this after the headlines.
Thank you, Marcus, and good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Wednesday, January 29th. It's the Feast of St. Juniper. And today's news is brought to you by Visiting Angels, providing loving care and assistance for seniors in need at visitingangels.com. President Trump has signed an executive order cutting federal funding to medical institutions that provide transgender procedures for people younger than 19. This includes puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and surgical procedures. Andrea Picciotti-Bayer joins us after this news break with more. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is denying accusations he wants to ban certain types of food. President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services is on Capitol Hill today for his first of two confirmation hearings. He pushed back against claims that he wants to ban certain food as well as vaccines. President Trump is asking Elon Musk to go get the two astronauts who have been stuck on the International Space Station. The astronauts were part of a Boeing mission to the International Space Station back in June that was supposed to last around 8 to 10 days. Issues with Boeing spacecraft have left them there for months, with the return mission delayed until March. A new prototype passenger jet has broken the sound barrier during a supersonic test flight. The Boom Supersonic XB-1 aircraft accelerated to over Mach 1 speed on Tuesday while flying 35,000 feet over California's Mojave Desert. It was the first civilian aircraft to reach speeds of over 850 miles per hour since the Concorde airliner over 20 years ago. The CEO of Boom Supersonic praised his team for accomplishing the feat, and he said he hopes to bring the benefits of supersonic flight to everyone. And the Mona Lisa is getting a room of her own. Leonardo da Vinci's painting will get its own special exhibition space as part of renovations to the Louvre in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron announced the renovation project on Tuesday and said the museum will be redesigned, restored, and expanded. It comes after the famous art museum said its buildings were starting to deteriorate and overcrowding was starting to have a negative impact. From the AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Dan McGraw.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. My guest, Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, legal analyst for EWTN News. Also the director of Conscience Project. You can follow her work at conscience-project.org. Andrea, I'm really glad to have you join us. How are you?
I'm doing great, Marcus. How are you?
I'm well, and I'm very heartened by this news. You and I have spoken about this particular issue quite a number of times, so this is a step in the right direction and then some.
Yeah, I almost think it's like a leap. It's like when you're watching the Olympics track and field and people are doing that. It's amazing what has happened since the inauguration day, as far as dismantling gender ideology from the federal government, and just yesterday really taking a bold step forward to protecting children and parents and whistleblowers as well. So it's huge. This is huge.
Just on a common sense level, Andrea, I mean, it's not like this thing is in our rearview mirrors yet, but, you know, we're getting there. Like you mentioned, it's a leap, so we have enough to be able to talk retrospectively. How did we get here? We won't even allow children of that age and under 18 to get tattoos. And yet we provide federal funding for permanent, irreversible medical mutilation and chemical, anywhere from chemical castration to intervention, to their bodies that they will suffer from the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think because this is really an offense against God's creation, you know, the mastermind behind this is the enemy. Right? Yep. No doubt about it. Yep. And he's manipulated people either with the desire for their own profit, or some of them with a confused understanding of kind of not wanting to discriminate against people, especially, you know, in the legal realm. I see that happening. People are behind laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, and when the Biden administration kind of inserted the idea that gender identity is also included under that notion, you know, many people just didn't blink, and they should have. They should have said, wait a second. You know, this is no grounding in reality or biological reality or the actual laws that have been written. I do think that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the profit motive for a lot of these big outfits, whether they be big hospitals or even groups like Planned Parenthood, which is a big provider of testosterone for girls who want to present as a boy. Yeah. You know, we know that Planned Parenthood has done terrible things in the abortion realm, and their moneyed interests were served in the gender ideology realm as well. So, yeah, I mean, but behind it all, and that really does bring us back to our knees on this. Yep. This is spiritual warfare because it was an attack on the nature of the human person, using people who are particularly vulnerable, dysphoric children, people who maybe have suffered abuse, neglect, something that led them to think that some sort of gender transition, and I put that in quotes, would alleviate the pain that they're feeling emotionally, psychologically.
And in fact, the studies are proving more and more. But I know that many of the people doing the studies don't want to talk about the detrimental effects of these interventions. So the studies are at least showing that there are no positive effects, and more statistical realities are proving this. And Gosh, I mean, think about the fact that, and I'm really glad because they're being hit where it hurts the most, which is the cutback of federal funding to institutions who are providing these services is an unfair way to describe it. But think about the fact that their medical bills from the time they're that young, they'll forever be tacked with, but also the lifelong medical complications they're going to face until the day they die. And all of this has been done in the name of being affirming.
Well, and they weren't informing. That's the biggest problem.
Right.
They weren't informing. They weren't giving accurate information. The thing that I really, the details in this most recent executive order are really significant, and they're worth mentioning. That in the president's executive order of yesterday, really did direct the Department of Health and Human Services to start doing research.
Yeah.
To gather up more information to be able to understand how to help these dysphoric kids without these sorts of mutilations. And that's kind of, we're in this pickle. We're in a pickle. There are kids that are definitely, whether they're victims of social contagion, suggestion, manipulation, they're struggling. That's a reality. And so we need to figure out how we can help them. And so if people are to say, hey, the federal government now is not going to help these kids, that's just not true. What we're aiming to do is to actually give them the help that they need without inflicting additional injury and lasting injury on them.
Yep. And that's why the part of that executive order about protecting whistleblowers is so crucial, because you and I have talked about this. It's speculation, but I have a feeling the mountain of lawsuits against medical institutions that have done these things, these mutilations and chemical castrations, is coming. I don't know if it's coming in the next 10, 20 years, but there's no way that there's not going to be a societal pushback at some point.
No, absolutely. And we've already seen it with these young people that kind of identify as de-transitioners, who got on this transition bandwagon and then realized that this wasn't giving them any kind of peace,
right,
but instead had problems. And they oftentimes were transitioned before the age of being able to give informed consent. And their parents, many of whom were bullied, were manipulated into thinking that this was the only option. We've heard time and time again parents being told, do you want a dead daughter or a son who's alive, to justify these kinds of interventions on young girls who are dysphoric. That's just a terrible thing to tell a parent, especially, if the parent has seen their child suffering so much. Yep. There is provision for holding doctors accountable.
Yep.
And I do think that that's really where we're going to see kind of the medical community walking away from this, when they realize that there are going to be lawsuits for violating these basic tenets of do no harm, make sure that your patient and if they're a minor, their family is fully informed of all the repercussions of anything before they go for it. Yeah. So, it's kind of an incredible move forward. Marcus, there are still things yet to be done.
Yep.
And I think it's worth highlighting. I've spoken before. This executive order makes a very important point about making sure that parents that are affirming their child's biological reality should not lose custody of their children.
Right.
But not included in this order is that we can't condition fostering or adoption on the willingness of a prospective foster or adoptive parent to buy into gender affirmation. And that's something that a number of states and the Biden administration were pushing.
That's right.
So I think that it was an innocent mistake to not include that, and I'm hoping that we can see rulemaking that was done under the Biden administration rescinded as soon as it's possible to be able to rescind those orders.
And that's why institutions like the Conscience Project are at the forefront of dialoguing this, and I'm really glad, because you and I have talked about this in Wisconsin. This is an issue. In fact, in many states, this has been an issue. But like this executive order, I'm glad that the wording also includes that the Attorney General will promote legislation to enact private right of action for children and parents who've been mutilated, and for the parents of those children. Andrea, thank you so much for making the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me on, Marcus. Have a good evening.
You too. My guest, Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who is legal analyst for EWTN News and also the director of the Conscience Project. We've been talking about President Trump signing an executive order to protect children from chemical and surgical gender mutilation. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum, including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
My daughter told me she was published in a scientific journal as an undergrad. I'm so proud of her. The world needs Catholic physicists, and my daughter's going to be one of them.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
CMF Curo is a Catholic healthcare ministry providing families nationwide with a better solution centered around whole health, spirit, mind, and body. Our members share their medical burdens within a faith-filled community. At CMF Curo, our members have access to a spiritual director, concierge services, and other health and spiritual resources. Find out if CMF Curo is a better solution for your family. Visit mycatholichealthcare.com. That's mycatholichealthcare.com.
How would you like to celebrate the Divine Mercy at the Shrine of the Divine Mercy in Poland on Divine Mercy Sunday? Well, you can. Steve Ray here, inviting you to join us in Poland as we follow the footprints of John Paul II, Maria Faustina, and Maximilian Kolbe. Daily Mass at the most iconic, beautiful churches and delicious local foods. Join us in April for Divine Mercy Sunday in Poland.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Thomas More, best known for his martyrdom, but he sets another example for us, his vocational discernment. As a young man, he disappointed his father because he dreamed of becoming a scholar and pursuing a religious vocation. His disinterest in professional life was the cause of his father's disappointment. We discussed this with, including Thomas More's views on reconciling with the world, with Dr. Travis Curtright. Dr. Curtright is Professor of Humanities and Literature, Chair of the Humanities Department, Director of Shakespeare and Performance at Ave Maria University, and his book, The Controversial Thomas More, is due out this spring. Travis, it is great to speak with you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, the joy is completely mine, and I was really glad to have a professor of Ave Maria University to talk about this for personal reasons, obviously. And I know there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to Thomas More. Let's frame the conversation with a very deep sense, very clear sense of his spirituality first, and go from there.
His spirituality?
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say that he was a layman, and so he didn't have a particular Franciscan spirituality or Dominican spirituality. He did have set times of prayer, something like you might find in a monastery, for example. I fancy that he took that idea of being a dutiful Christian from Cicero's De Officiis, but he just transferred that importance of doing one's duty to the importance of doing one's norms of piety. So More, after he discerned his vocation, would lament how most of his day was given to the practice of law and the rest to his family and his household, that he had to steal time away from sleeping and eating to write his masterpiece, Utopia.
Right.
But in this framework, he had set times of prayer. So he read the penitential psalms with his family. He did mental prayer or personal meditation on Scripture. He received the sacraments regularly. He practiced mortification, both physical and mental. He wore a hair shirt. He tried to monitor his interior thoughts and memories so that he could turn them towards Christ. Even tribulations he tried to think of as opportunities to thank God for an opportunity to grow in holiness. And so in his writings, he singles out neglect of duty as the first step to what he calls slipping from grace and the aid of God. And so from neglect, you slip from the hand of God, and then you fall into what he would call self-delight or pride.
Mm-hmm.
And then from self-delight or pride, in one passage he calls it any inkling of delight in ourselves, we fall into outright rebellion.
Right.
So keeping to these norms of piety throughout the day was a duty for him, no different than practicing the law, but even more important than, say, practicing the law or being a good husband and a good father.
Mm-hmm.
Give first to God his due.
And his sense of being bound by that duty, and therefore his commitment to living out this obligation of his spiritual life, that was what strained his relationship with his father.
Well, yeah, I think his vocational discernment was earlier. That was when he was, 16 to 28.
Mm-hmm.
Moore attended the University of Oxford for only 2 years before John Moore pulled young Thomas from the university and sent him to Lincoln's Inn to study law. And that created a rift between the two of them, which lasted until the question of Moore's vocation was finally settled by his marriage in 1505. But before 1505, young Thomas's attraction to a life of letters, and perhaps worse, to a religious vocation, angered his father, John Moore, who was intent that Thomas should emulate him. And I think it's probably worth adding that John Moore was the eldest son of 6,
mm-hmm.
and he wanted to restore his family's fortunes and enhance them through his London practice of law. He did so. He wanted Thomas to join him, and no wonder. I mean, if you ran a law firm, you'd probably want Thomas Moore, a genius by any standard, to be your partner in the firm. And John very much wanted to see Thomas Moore master the practice of law rather than, writing utopia.
In some sense, one can actually commiserate with his father and understand that.
Yes.
But
Moore writes, he's supposed to be studying law, but he's writing a comedy on King Solomon. We don't have the text. And he's switching from the study of Latin to Greek. And he says, I live just as I please. So as a young man who was interested in a life of letters,
mm-hmm.
He was somebody who saw the theatricals at Lambeth Palace, and those moved him. There's stories about how he would jump into plays already underway and create a part for himself. So he was a man with a lot of interests, and to channel those energies towards a particular professional end, I think, was probably John Moore's main objective.
Right. It's funny, even as I think about this, and John 12:32, right? When I'm lifted high, I'll draw all things to myself, and I'll draw all to myself. Augustine had seen this as drawing all things in creation as being ordered to God, and being the Renaissance man that Thomas More is, he would have undoubtedly began to see that in his own pursuit of the spiritual disciplines.
Exactly. So that passage that you identified was famous amongst Christian humanists like Erasmus and
mm-hmm.
Moore. And both of them were drawing from St. Augustine's earlier work. And Augustine thought that all things included all classes of men, of every language and of every age, all diversities of talents, and then he adds in all the professions of lawful and useful arts. So all professions of lawful and useful arts are foreordained to salvation,
mm-hmm.
as are all ages and men. And this is an important passage because everyone may strive for holiness or become holy in his or her walk of life and trade or practice of work. And I think this perspective was what solved Moore's vocational dilemma. He sort of studied himself into what they used to refer to as a mixed way of life, not just a contemplative life or an active life, but a mix of the two, because he thought you could sanctify yourself in any of these lawful and useful arts.
Right. And that's why meeting Erasmus and also just knowing of the influence of Augustine helped shape the kind of man and the decisions that he made about his professional life.
I think so. Moore and Erasmus were very close.
Mm-hmm.
In one of Moore's letters, he writes that he loved Erasmus vehemently, vehementer diligo. And it wasn't just a personal bond. It was because of Erasmus's work on scriptural exegesis. Moore thought Erasmus had done more for learning than anyone else in several centuries. And so he argued that all of Christendom should cherish Erasmus's work.
And it's funny to think about, because we're not as conversant about Erasmus of Rotterdam's contributions to the spiritual life in Christianity and Christian history as someone like Thomas More would have been.
That's right, and I think that's tragic in some senses.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't have had Thomas More if you didn't have Erasmus. And even when Erasmus hears of More's death, he says, "I lost the other half of my soul." And so that classical idea of friendship, a friend is another self, or Shakespeare puts it, thou and I am one, and As You Like It, this two halves of one soul. That's very much a classical ideal that was brought back during the time period, and Erasmus and More thought of one another as other selves, as best friends.
Yeah. And so when you think about the way they worked, the lives that they chose to live, and this notion of reconciling all things in Christ, they had this true integrated view of the created order and its submission to the authority of Christ's lordship.
Yes. Yes, I think that's right. Erasmus's Enchiridion was a book of spiritual combat that he wrote primarily for laypersons. And More himself in his Life of Pico is the translation that he does, but then he adds to it original poetry, which includes things like rules for spiritual combat or a poem on how to grow in love for Christ. And so they really wanted to have this effective piety that was from the heart. And, it's interesting because this business of an effective piety, Erasmus mentions when More's at court, when More's a politician serving the king, Erasmus says that, true piety finds in Thomas More a practicing follower. He speaks of his faith with conviction and from the heart, no matter who he's with or what he's doing. And then he adds, what becomes then of those people who think that Christians are not to be found except in monasteries?
Travis, thank you so much
for a politician who is holy.
Thank you so much for making the time. My guest, Dr. Travis Curtright, and we've been talking about the spirituality of St. Thomas More. Stay tuned. I'm Mark Speeter.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu. This program brought to you in part by the town of Ave Maria, Florida.
Ave Maria, a big kind of small town. A golf cart friendly, ride your bike everywhere kind of town with something for everyone. Resort style amenities, 2 golf courses, shopping, and dining in our town center. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at the core of the community and a wide range of homes to meet your family's needs. Visitors are welcome. More information can be found at avemaria.com. Ave Maria, a big kind of small town.
What does the 9th commandment forbid? The Catholic Catechism says the 9th commandment warns against carnal concupiscence, sins against the flesh. What is concupiscence? It is the consequence of original sin. Though baptism purifies the soul of all sin, it does not remove our tendency toward sin. In this rebellion of the flesh against the spirit, as defined by St. Paul, we must develop purity of heart. the desire always to do the will of God, especially in the area of charity and chastity. Purity requires modesty. Modesty protects the intimate center of a person. It refuses to unveil what should be hidden. Modesty guides how you look at others and behave toward them. It should dictate one's choice of clothing so as not to exploit or tempt another. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Dr. Ray Guarendi. When I've had enough. I ask parents, when do you decide to discipline? One of the most common answers is, when I've had enough. If discipline is designed to teach, then we need to discipline before we've had enough. We need to discipline because the behavior's wrong, not because emotionally it's pushed us to our edge. Besides, when you get to when you've had enough, you're much more likely to yell and scream and say things that you have to go to confession for. So, the suggestion is discipline out of principle, not emotion. Principle means because it needs discipline, and I'm going to do it when I'm calm. Emotion means I'm going to be moved to do it just because I'm mad.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. This segment is intriguing, and I'd like to invite all of you to pay attention to it and to also ponder some of the ramifications of it. Artificial intelligence, it's becoming more and more prevalent. We all know this. Many would say invasive, and I think some of them might be right. The Vatican has issued several statements in the last year about the problems that artificial intelligence creates and the ethical uses of AI. Now, however, there are a series of what's known as deepfake videos making the rounds that show Pope Francis selling a prayer, marketing a prayer that promises to bring extreme material wealth. Mike Dougherty joins us for this bizarre story. Unfortunately, these videos on Pope Francis are not the only ones out there. I found a few on Cardinal Mark Ouellette. So there's a concern here. And the truth is, if you know what to look out for, it's rather reasonably discerned. Mike Dougherty is professor of philosophy at Ohio Dominican University. He holds the St. Ruth Casper Chair in Philosophy. Mike, I'm very glad to be speaking with you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You know, so you're a philosopher, I'm a theologian, and many people would be thinking, well, what do a philosopher and a theologian have to teach us about empirical science and artificial intelligence? And yet, given what we've just seen with these artificial deepfakes, I think it's about time we had this conversation.
Absolutely. This is my goal in focusing on this is to document a highly unusual phenomenon. And so with technology changing and the church recognizing that, I think it's good for people to know what's out there.
Mm-hmm. And what's out there, it's a tool. You and I can recognize that on an objective level, moral level, it's a tool, and therefore there's a certain moral neutrality about it. But these deepfakes do, in fact, present multiple concerns, one of which is, if we don't know what you're looking out for, they can present themselves as true.
Absolutely. In my own case, I was on YouTube, and this advertisement popped up, and I recognized, of course, instantly the Holy Father. And the first thing that I saw as I was listening is that he was speaking flawless English. Mm-hmm. And that struck me as unusual because I've heard him many, many times in person. And I was in Rome this summer, so I attended a few audiences when I was there with my family. So I know what he sounds like, and I've seen him online. And so it was first the English that got me going, and then listening to the content, which was profoundly disturbing. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, it looks like the Holy Father is speaking about a particular prayer. The words he appears to be uttering in this deepfake video, they match his lips, so it's right. Compelling to watch, but it's just a dangerous route because there's nothing of substance, nothing that reflects our knowledge of what the tradition is and what the genuine role of being prayerful is. And so that, I thought, my first reaction was to chuckle, and then I thought, no, this is serious. I want to document this. So I started recording the videos as they popped up, and then I decided to investigate further.
Yeah, and you rightly note, it's easy for someone like you and I to just laugh this off. We can say, this is kind of ridiculous, and you can tell. But frankly, we don't want to not pay enough attention to it. This isn't a matter that's just confined to the realm of jocosity. That there's real concern at play here that as artificial intelligence gets better and better, especially at deepfaking, the reality of the generation of videos such as these, and therefore anywhere from misinformation to misleading individuals in doctrines in the faith, can become true problems.
Absolutely. And really the harm is really in two ways. There'll be those who are taken by it and think that they see what appears to be the Holy Father saying these things, and they'll mistake this AI magisterium for the real one. But then there are also those who have no faith at all and perhaps are even hostile to the church, and they'll see, it looks like the Pope is selling things, and then it might further harden them to being open to the truths of the Catholic faith. So I think there are two forms of harm here. So it takes documentation and talking about it. And just yesterday, the Coming from Rome was a brand new document about it only came out yesterday morning, Antiqua Nova, and it was coming from two dicasteries, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith and the dicastery for culture and education, and it talks about the harm of deepfakes. So Rome is on it. We need to do a support discussions of it, and I think it's timely.
Yep. Oh, it's completely timely. And in fact, I'm glad that we are ahead of the curve in terms of the discussion, because I'm very sure this is going to keep making the rounds, especially on Catholic media, as we address this and keep people informed. And so I don't want to give this thing more credit or more viewership than it's already getting. But just to keep our listeners informed, the video calls for you to click so that you can pay a certain amount to get access to the secret prayer that is essentially a formulaic participation in what we call the prosperity gospel. And as someone who's formerly Assemblies of God, formerly Pentecostal, I spotted that a mile away. Like, it didn't pass the sniff test a mile away. And I can tell that when you went through it, it was the same thing.
That's right. The language that the AI Pope uses, and the language that certainly the impersonation of Cardinal Mark Willett it's using language that Catholics would be familiar with initially, but then it takes a dark turn, and it's making spiritual things prayer instruments for your own worldly gratification. We don't hear anything about heaven. We don't hear about the afterlife. It's all about having success here and now. So it's a kind of spiritual get-rich scheme. But again, that has a history in 19th century American history, and some who have documented this phenomenon of the prosperity gospel have shown it's now a worldwide phenomenon. It's a misreading of Scripture, and it's a deviant sort of change from the message of the gospel.
Yeah, and I don't want to over-spiritualize this, but one of the things I did pick up on that greatly bothered me is, especially in the 14-minute video with Cardinal Mark Willett, the almost Gnostic way in which the message was presented. This was a secret scroll, an ancient biblical scroll discovered 2,000 years ago, kept a secret because the rich people don't want you to pray it. And you listen to all of this, and it just it takes you down this spiral of conspiracy, and the Catholic Church does not do anything from the shadows. But there's an almost conspiratorial allure to this nonsense, and that's why we need to be very guarded for the sake of our souls.
Yes, and then we also have past examples where people eat this stuff up. We think of Dan Brown books. Bestsellers. It's almost like a Raiders of the Lost Ark adventure for the Holy Grail. We have, in popular culture, we have these kinds of, imaginative, fantastical stories. And I think this is playing into that. But then it's pulling in historical figures or even, contemporary prelates. Even, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa makes an appearance at one point. He's the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. Yep. He's, well known, given the crisis in the area. He's become quite a prominent figure, certainly with his elevation to the College of Cardinals in the last year or so. And so to tap into these figures that have authority for Catholics, certainly everyone will recognize the Pope, but even more sophisticated Catholics who could recognize, a Cardinal Ouellet or Cardinal Pizzaballa, it's going to seem more compelling and interesting. So it's appealing to a lot of different aspects, and there's a temptation to, as you said, kind of these Gnostic secret teachings that somehow are kept from everyone. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You expressed that very eloquently. I entirely agree.
And here's my problem, right? So even based on what you just responded to my statement, I don't want to over-spiritualize this, but there can be something demonic about this whole thing, that pay this amount of money and you get the secret prayer, and it's a formula that's going to promise you X, Y, and Z. And again, I'm not saying that therefore you're conjuring demons. What I mean is that there's a perniciousness that takes you away from true faith in Jesus Christ and reliance on divine providence.
Absolutely. And also, I think it helps develop, even from a non-theological point of view, developing vices.
Right.
Like thinking that excellence in the world is not the result of practice and struggle and habituating and working hard and developing the whole scheme of virtues, that get replaced with a credit card payment to some website.
Right. Mike, I greatly enjoyed this conversation. Great to speak with you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your good work. Have a great night.
You too. My guest, Mike Dougherty, professor of philosophy at Ohio Dominican University. We've been talking about the quote-unquote deepfake magisterium. Stay tuned, because I want to comment on this in the next segment so that we can really understand the ramifications of deepfake AI. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum, including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
I've seen the difference in my son since he's been at Ave Maria. He's happy, he's excited about what he's going to do with his degree, and he's living his faith.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her two children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, "What are you here for?"
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
While I was working at this Protestant station, in the midst of being challenged by former Catholics, I received this book from Ascension Press, and I became hooked on apologetics. I discovered Catholic Answers. I discovered EWTN. I started listening to all these programs. I would just go to local Catholic bookstores and grab every single book I could on apologetics. Deep in my heart, I knew that it was true, and I trusted the Church for her 2,000 years of teaching. I knew a certain amount of Scripture, but I wasn't able to defend it as well. That period of my life where I worked in Christian radio and was challenged by former Catholics, as painful as it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it really forced me to dive in more deeply and fall even more in love with the Catholic Church.
Catholic Connections, Teresa Tomeo. Weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Maybe you've been hearing a lot about the need to make a spiritual communion while participating from home in a live-streamed or broadcast Mass. There's more to it than reciting the act of spiritual communion. We should begin by having sincere repentance for our sins and affirming our belief that Christ's death redeemed us. Next, we call to mind the spiritual gifts found in Christ's sacrifice and thank God earnestly for them. Now we are disposed to pray the traditional prayer of spiritual communion. Jesus, I embrace you and unite myself wholly to you.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. We were talking earlier about the notion of deepfake AI. I want to create certain definitions here. They call them deepfakes because by use of artificial intelligence, videos and images can be generated that simulate as close as possible reality, including anywhere from voice pattern similarities to especially mouthing the words correctly to pictures. And so that's what deepfaking means in general. And it's an advent that has arisen with the great AI boom. And I say great in inverted commas here, in air quotes. There's a problem. There's a problem with deepfaking, and that is simply the question of truth. The dissemination of information that digital technology allows for means that you and I have a moral obligation, and also just the simple onus by means of natural law of the exercise of our reason for discerning things well. But in order to do that, we need to be sure that what we are reading is credible. And that's why it is perfectly acceptable. Aristotle used to say that one of the signs of the well-trained mind is to entertain a thought and not be bothered by it. And what he meant by that is you can read things that differ from your opinion. And I often do. I do a lot of that for the sake of this program. You can read opinions of people who vary from you. And the whole thing is we ought to be open to the pursuit of truth, and that's why we are also open to being proven wrong, and that's why we need to learn how to discern what evidence really looks like. That's the problem with deepfaking. It presents things as if it is objectively empirical evidence, because up till this point in history, video evidence and audio evidence outside of the work of truly masterful hackers and manipulators, video and audio evidence were to some degree incontrovertible. In fact, very often in court cases, unless it is really demonstrable that the footage has been doctored or the audio recording has been doctored, the belief is that no, you can trust this, and therefore it is credible information. That is no longer the case. Deepfaking, the advent of deepfaking and artificial intelligence is going to render society unable to trust the source of information and videos. Now, that sounds like a blanket statement. I want to include some caveats here. Undoubtedly, as this technology develops, we're going to develop a capacity to be able to discern this well, and maybe some experts will develop certain tools to be able to tell a deepfake from the original. But the whole objective of the development of AI, things like DeepSeek, which is a Chinese artificial intelligence platform, the whole purpose of the development of deepfaking is to make it so seemingly authentic that you can't discern it from the real thing. And this is really in the interest of developing the technology so that it's available for use for a myriad of reasons. But it presents true ethical problems. And one of the problems, as I mentioned in the last segment, is that deepfakes have been made of the Holy Father. Now, this is pulling footage from the 60-minute interview, the interview he did on the program 60 Minutes. And it puts words in his mouth, literally, that he never said. And that had no place in the entire interview. No question was asked to that level. And so his response makes no sense if you know the interview. But it's seemingly real. It is visually convincing for the one reason that the words that are coming out of his mouth are matched by the lip movement and the seeming bodily gestures, which then leads you to believe that the Holy Father actually said that. Unless you know the Holy Father, you know his voice, and you also know he wouldn't say something like this because it's borrowing directly from a very Gnostic sense of the prosperity gospel to even worse, something from the New Age movement called The Secret. Now, all of this I say because I'd like you to hear the recording so we can comment on it.
The only thing you need to do to make this happen is to recite the sacred prayer. and then financial blessings will start flowing into your life from every possible direction. If today you need to pay a bill, settle a debt, or simply want more prosperity in your life, the sacred prayer will help you. This prayer is so powerful and so strong that you should only recite it once a day, or you might end up attracting too many blessings. Just to help you understand the power of this prayer, it has been kept hidden from you for years, because this is the secret that the wealthy use, and they definitely don't want you to discover it.
As all of you heard, well, this is clearly problematic nonsense. The Holy Father would never say this. But playing it on the radio, devoid of the video, all of you might have probably picked up the fact that there's a certain robotic quality to the voice. And so that's what the software does. It generates based on vocal samples. Someone might have recorded it, and I might be attributing the robotic quality to the thing after the fact. Regardless, when you watch it, if you don't know the Holy Father's voice and if you trust it, it is visually convincing. And so that raises the larger question. I've spoken to people who, when you say, well, AI is concerning, they say, well, I don't like it when people say AI is concerning. I want to hear that AI has benefits. Okay, well, good for you. Here's the problem. AI is truly morally, ethically concerning. And I'm not lambasting people who see the benefit of it. I see the benefit of it. And there truly are true evangelical benefits to the exercise of the work of AI. There are certain things out there that have been generated for the purpose of helping Catholics develop a greater sense of their faith. Magisterium AI is one such example. I think Catholic AI, there's something out there called Catholic AI. Catholic Answers, our friends in this apostolate, created an artificial intelligence bot, if you will, and I hope I'm using the right term here, but it's an avatar that answers your questions about the faith. So there are uses to all of this. There's use of technology in evangelization. And the reason why is because, as with all technology within bounds, they are morally neutral. And therefore, as instruments that are morally neutral, human consciences and human decisions dictate the morality of the action. The problem with this particular issue in deepfaking is that it is all too tempting to go down the path of utilizing this technology for anywhere from selfish gain. Because, like I mentioned in the earlier segment, the problem with this particular deepfaking issue is that you're called to click on a particular link, pay a certain amount, which is already the sin of simony, selling something sacred, pay a certain amount so that you get the secret prayer that was discovered in an ancient biblical scroll thousands of years ago that the rich have kept secret from you, and that now if you pray it in this formulaic way, you are going to get all the wealth and prosperity that you need. Christianity never functions that way. The Catholic Church has never functioned that way. AI's capacity to produce this content that seems indistinguishable from what's actually real is going to be a major obstacle. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to take a good look at this and say, these are legitimate concerns. Sure, you can laugh about it because some of this is laughable. But when I am presented with a 40-minute video of Cardinal Mark Ouellette, that, well, it borrows from him the first part of the video, then it goes on to a female voice. When I'm presented with these videos, and if I don't know how to discern well, I have to tell you, frankly, they can mislead, and worse, they can degrade one's faith in Christ Jesus, his church, and in the fidelity of the doctrines that Christ has handed down. Our trust is in God's providence. Our trust is in the deposit of faith that has been handed down from the hand of Christ. Our trust is in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church that becomes a guardian of that deposit of faith. We ought to utilize the net. We ought to utilize social media. We ought to utilize any technological instrument at our disposal for the propagation of the gospel. That's what we're doing here at Ave Maria Radio and EWTN. We've engaged every avenue possible because that's not just a matter of expansive vision, that's a matter of responsibility. That if these tools have been given to us, evangelize them we must. Provide avenues for evangelization we must. The gospel must be made available at every given avenue that's available. This is the way we bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. And my mentor, Al Cresta, Mother Angelica, they were truly concerned with the proclamation of the gospel for the salvation of souls to the ends of the earth. They used whatever tools were at their disposal for that sake. And as these tools continue to become more expansive, we have to do the same. But do so with the same caution of knowing that we will be held to moral account. And so for those of us employing use of these technologies, think back to documents like Inter Mirifica and realize that there's a responsibility at play here. God and His church wants us to use these technologies to bring forth the salvation of Jesus Christ to everyone who needs and hungers for it. But at the same time, for those of us who consume all of this, we now need to develop greater senses of discernment. And if we've never had it before, we now have an urgent obligation to do so. I think that this piece of news about the deepfake of Pope Francis is going to it's going to take the web by storm for a while, and it will die out as more deepfakes come up. But I think this is just the beginning, and the deepfaking of ecclesiastical authorities, as has been done here, Pope Francis and Cardinal Mark Ouellette, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we ought to look out for it. That doesn't mean that we have to fear it. No, we shouldn't have to fear it. But we have to learn to discern well. And in learning to discern well, we then have to share with our brothers and sisters the truth and how to discern fact from fiction. Like right now, when you heard that recording, you can tell that there's, like I mentioned, a robotic quality to the voice. At some point, the sampling is going to become more and more realistic that even that capacity might be lost to us. So how do we discern? We discern by developing a capacity for knowing the truth. We discern by thinking rightly about doctrine, about reality, about the faith, which means now more than ever, there must be a reclamation of the human capacity for thinking logically and reasoning through fallacies and lies, so that not only will the truth prevail, but that the gospel of Christ, which is the fullness of truth, will prevail. For the eternal salvation of souls. Thank you for joining us on Ave Maria in the afternoon. Until next time, I'm Marcus Peter.